Chapter 18. The End of Casualia. I leapt across the rouged square of silk, scattering the vials and beads that were the pieces of our game, flinging Sura to the floor, pressing myself across her body that she might be protected. In the same instant he hurled the knife, struck a chest behind us, and I had rolled over, throwing my legs under me, trying to draw the sword from my sheath, when Ho-Tu, running, hook-knife in hand, leapt on me, the curved blade streaking for my throat. I threw my left hand between the knife and my throat and felt the sudden hot flash of pain in my cut sleeve, the sudden splash of blood in my eyes. But then I had my hands on Ho-Tu's wrists, trying to force the knife back, and he, with his two hands, leaning his weight on his hands, his feet slipping on the floor, stepping on the square of silk, pressed down again toward my throat. "Stop it!" cried Sura. "Ho-Tu, stop!" I pressed up, and then, knowing his full weight was on the knife, I suddenly ceased resistance, removing my counter-pressure, and rolled from under him. Ho-Tu fell heavily on the floor, and I slipped free, rolled, and had the sword from my sheath, standing. He scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of hate, looked around, saw the slave goad, ran to it, and whipped it from the wall. I didn't pursue him, I didn't want to kill him. He turned, and I saw in almost one motion of his finger the goad switched to on, the dial rotated to the kill point. And then, crouching, the goad blazing in his hand, he approached me warily. But Sura stood between us. "Do not hurt him," said Sura. "Stand aside," said Ho-Tu. "No," cried Sura. I saw the dial rotate back from the kill point, and Ho-Tu swept the goad towards her angrily. There was an intense eruption of needle-like sparks, and Sura screamed in pain and fell stumbling to one side, weeping, crying out on the stones of the floor. For an instant the face of Ho-Tu seemed in agony, and then he turned again to me. Again I saw the dial rotate, and the goad now seemed a jet of fire in his hand. I had backed to the chest, resheathed my sword, and drawn forth the knife which had been thrown. It was a killing knife, short, well balanced for throwing, tapered on one side. I reversed it in my hand. With a cry of rage and anger, Ho-Tu hurled the goad at me. It passed to the left of my head, struck the wall with an explosion of sparks, and lay burning on the stones. "Throw!" ordered Ho-Tu. I looked at the knife and the man. "It was with a knife such as this," I said, "that you slew a warrior of Thentis on the bridge in Korriban in Anvar, near the Tower of Warriors." Ho-Tu looked puzzled. "You struck him from behind," I said, "the blow of a coward." "I killed no one," said Ho-Tu. "You are mad." I felt a cold fury moving through me. "Turn around," I told him. "Your back to me." Woodenly, Ho-Tu did so. I let him stand that way for a moment. Sura had now, shaken, still feeling the pain of the goad, risen to her hands and knees. "Do not kill him," she whispered. "When will it strike, Ho-Tu?" I asked. He said nothing. "And where?" I probed. "Where?" "Please do not kill him," cried Sura. "Throw!" cried Ho-Tu. Sura leapt between us, standing with her back to Ho-Tu. "Kill Sura first!" she screamed. "Stand aside!" cried Ho-Tu, not turning, his fist clenched. "Stand aside, slave!" "No!" cried Sura. "No!" "Do not fear," I said. "I will not kill you with your back turned." Ho-Tu turned to face me, with his arm pushing Sura to one side. "Pick up your hook knife," I said. Ho-Tu, not taking his eyes much from me, found the hook knife and lifted it. "Do not fight!" screamed Sura. I crouched down, the killing knife now held by the hilt in my hand. Ho-Tu and I began to circle one another. "Stop!" cried Sura, and then she ran to the slave goad and picked it up. It was still incandescent, brilliant. One could not look on it without pain. "The goad," she said, "is at the kill point. Put down your weapons." Her eyes were closed and she was sobbing. The goad was clenched in her two hands, moving towards her throat. "Stop!" I cried. Ho-Tu flung away his hook knife and rushed to Sura, tearing the goad away from her. I saw him rotate it to minimum charge, turn it off, and fling it away. He took Sura in his arms, weeping, and then he turned to face me. "Kill me," he told me. I didn't wish to kill a man who was unarmed. "But," said Ho-Tu, "I killed no man in Korobar or elsewhere." "Kill us both," cried Sura, holding the squat, ugly Ho-Tu to her. "But he is innocent." "He killed," I told her. "It was not I," said Ho-Tu. "I am not he whom you seek." "You are he," I said. "I am not," he said. "A moment ago you attempted to kill me." "Yes," said Ho-Tu, "that is true, and I would do so again now." "Oh, you poor fool," said Sura, sobbing, to Ho-Tu, kissing him. "You would kill for a simple slave." "I love you," cried Ho-Tu. "I love you." "I too," she said, "love you, Ho-Tu." And he stood as though stunned. A strong man, he seemed shaken. His hands trembled on her. In his black eyes I saw tears. "Love," he said. "For Ho-Tu? Less than a man?" "You are my love," said Sura, "and have been so for many years." He looked at her, hardly daring to move. "Yes," she said. "I am not even a man," he said. "In you, Ho-Tu," she said, "I have found the heart of a Lal and the softness of flowers. You have been to me kindness and gentleness and strength, and you have loved me." And she looked up at him. "No man on Gore is more than a man than you." "I killed no one," he said to her. "I know that," said Sura. "You could not." "But when I thought of him with you," sobbed the Master Keeper, "I wanted to kill, to kill." "He did not even touch me," said Sura. "Do you not understand? He wanted to protect me, so brought me here and freed me." "Is this true?" asked Ho-Tu. I didn't speak. "Kill her," said Ho-Tu. "Forgive me." "He wears the black tunic," said Sura, "and I do not know who he is, but he is not of the black caste." "Let us not speak of such matters," I said sternly. Ho-Tu looked at me. "No," he said, "whoever you are, I killed no one." "I think I shall return to my compartment," I said, feeling it well to be on my way. "I wanted to hurt you," said Ho-Tu, looking at me. "But," said Sura to Ho-Tu, "it was me whom you hurt, Ho-Tu." There was still a trace of pain in her voice, the memory in her nerves of the strike of the slave goad. "Oh, forgive me," sobbed Ho-Tu, "forgive me." And she laughed. "A Master Keeper begging the forgiveness of a slave for touching her with a slave goad?" Ho-Tu looked down at the square of silk, the tumbled vials and beads. "Oh, what were you doing here?" he asked. "He was teaching me to play the game," she laughed, "with such things." Ho-Tu grinned. "Did you like it?" he asked. "No, Ho-Tu," laughed Sura. She kissed him. It's too difficult for me." Ho-Tu spoke to her. "I will play with you if you like," he said. "No, Ho-Tu," she said. "I would not like that." And then she left his arms to pick up the Kalika in the corner of her quarters. Smiling at him, she then returned to the centre of the compartment and sat down, cross-legged, for the instrument is commonly played that way, and bent over it. Her fingers touched the 6 strings, a note at a time, and then a melody of the caravans of Tor, a song of love. They did not notice me as I left the compartment. I found Flaminius the physician in his quarters, and he, obligingly, though drunk, treated the arm which Ho Tu had slashed with the hook knife. The wound was not at all serious. "The games of Caduralia can be dangerous," remarked Flaminius, swiftly wrapping a white cloth around the wound, securing it with 4 small metal snap clips. "It's true," I admitted. Even from the physician's quarters we could hear, at various points in the house, the laughter and sporting of drunken slaves in their cells, drunken guards running down one hall or another, playing jokes on each other. "This is the 6th hook knife wound I have treated today," said Flaminius. "Oh?" I asked. "Your opponent is, I suppose, dead?" said Flaminius. "Oh, no," I said. "Oh?" "I received this wound," I said, "in the quarters of Mistress Sura." "Ah!" laughed Flaminius. "What a wench!" And then he looked at me, grinning. "I trust Mistress Sura was taught something this evening?" I recalled instructing her in the game. "Yes," I said dourly, "this evening Miss Sura learned much." Flaminius laughed delightedly. "That is an arrogant slave," he said. "I would not mind getting my hands on her myself, but Ho Tu would not permit it. Ho Tu is insanely jealous of her, and she only a slave. Oh, by the way, Ho Tu was looking for you this evening." "I know," I said. "Beware of Ho Tu," said Flaminius. "I don't think Ho Tu will bother Chorus of the Black Caste," I said, rising to my feet. Flaminius looked at me with a certain drunken awe, and then he rose in his green quarters tunic and went to a chest in his room, from which he drew forth a large bottle of Parga. He opened it, and to my surprise poured 2 cups. He took a good mouthful of the fluid from one of the cups and bolted it down, exhaling with satisfaction. "You seem to me, from what I have heard and seen, a skilled physician," I said. He handed me the 2nd cup, though I wore the black tunic. "In the 4th year and 5th year of the reign of Marlanus," he said, regarding me evenly, "I was first in my caste in Ar." And then I took a swallow. "Ah," I said, "and then you discovered Parga." "No," he said. "A girl?" I asked. "No," said Flaminius, smiling. "No." And he took another swallow. "I thought to find an immunization against darkosis." "Darkosis is incurable," I said. "At one time, centuries ago, men of my caste claimed age was incurable. Others did not accept this and continued to work. The result was the stabilization serums." Darkosis, or the holy disease, or sacred affliction, is a virulent wasting disease of Gaul. Those afflicted with it, commonly spoken of simply as the afflicted ones, may not enter into normal society. They wander the countryside in shroud-like yellow rags, beating a wooden clapping device to warn men from their path. Some of them volunteer to be placed in Darkosis pits, several of which lay within the vicinity of Ar, and there they are fed and given drink, and of course isolated. The disease is extremely contagious. Those who contract the disease are regarded by the law as dead. Darkosis, I said, is thought to be holy to the priest-kings, and those afflicted with it to be consecrated to priest-kings. "A teaching of initiates," said Flaminius bitterly. "There is nothing holy about disease, about pain, about death." And he took another drink. "Darkosis," I said, "is regarded as an instrument of priest-kings, used to smite those who displease them." "Another myth of initiates," said Flaminius unpleasantly. "But how do you know that?" I queried. "I do not care," said Flaminius, "if it is true or not. I am a physician." "What happened?" I asked. For many years, said Flaminius, and this was even before 1110, in the year of Parkour and his horde, I and others worked secretly in the cylinder of physicians. We devoted our time, those hours in the day in which we could work, to study, research, test, and experiment. Unfortunately, for spite and for gold, word of our work was brought to the High Initiate by a minor physician discharged from our staff for incompetence. The Cylinder of Initiates demanded that the High Council of the Caste of Physicians put an end to our work. Not only that, it began discontinued, but that our results to that date be destroyed. The physicians, I am pleased to say, stood with us. There is little love lost between physicians and initiates, even as is the case between scribes and initiates. The Cylinder of the High Initiate then petitioned the High Council of the city to stop our work, but they, on the recommendation of Marlenus, who was then Uba, permitted our work to continue. Flaminius laughed. I remember Marlenus speaking to the High Initiate. Marlenus told him that either the priest-kings approved of our work or they did not. If they did approve, it should continue, and if they did not approve, they themselves, as the masters of Gore, would be quite powerful enough to put an end to it. I laughed. Flaminius looked at me curiously. It is seldom that those of the black caste laugh. What happened then? I asked. Flaminius took another drink, and then he looked at me bitterly. Before the next passage hand, armed men broke into the Cylinder of Physicians. The floors we worked on were burnt. The cylinder itself was seriously damaged. Our work, our records, the animals we used were all destroyed. Several of my staff were slain, others driven away. And he drew his tunic over his head. I saw that half of his body was scarred. These I had from the flames, he said, as I tried to rescue our work. But I was beaten away and our scrolls destroyed. He slipped the tunic back over his head. I am sorry, I said. Flaminius looked at me. He was drunk, and perhaps that is why he was willing to speak to me only of the black caste. There were tears in his eyes. I had, shortly before the fire developed a strain of earths resistant to the dark horse's organism. A serum cultured from their blood was injected in other animals, which subsequently we were unable to infect. It was tentative, only a beginning, but I had hoped. I had hoped very much. The men who attacked the cylinder, I said, who were they? Doubtless henchmen of initiates, said Flaminius. Initiates, incidentally, are not permitted by their caste codes to bear arms, nor are they permitted to injure or kill. Accordingly, they hire men for these purposes. Were the men not seized? I asked. Most escaped, said Flaminius. 2 were seized. These, following the laws of the city, were taken first for their questioning to the courts of the High Initiates. Flaminius smiled bitterly. But they escaped, he said. Did you try to begin your work again? I asked. Everything was gone, said Flaminius. The records, our equipment, the animals. Several of my staff had been slain. Those who did survive in large part do not wish to continue the work. He threw down another bolt of Parga. Besides, said he, the men of initiates, did we begin again, we'd only need to bring torches and steel once more. So what did you do? I asked. Flaminius laughed. I thought how foolish was Flaminius, he said. I returned one night to the floors on which we had worked. I stood there amidst the ruined equipment, the burnt walls, and I laughed. I realized then that I could not combat the initiates. They would in the end conquer. I don't think so, I said. Superstition proclaimed as truth will always conquer truth, ridiculed as superstition. Do not believe it, I said. And I laughed, said Flaminius, and I realized that what moves men is greed and pleasure and power and gold, and that I, Flaminius, who had sought fruitlessly all my life to slay one disease, was a fool. You're no fool, I said. No longer, he said. I left the cylinder of physicians, and the next day took service in the house of Cernus, where I have been for many years. I am content here, I am well paid, I have much gold and some power, and my pick of red silk girls. What man could ask for more? Flaminius could, I said. And he looked at me startled, and then he laughed and shook his head. No, no, I have learned to despise men. That is why this is a good house for me. He looked at me drunkenly with hatred. I despise men. That is why I drink with you. I nodded curtly and turned to leave. One more little thing to this story, said Flaminius, lifting his bottle to me. What's that? I asked. At the games on the 2nd of Ankara in the Blades, I saw the high initiate Complicius Serenus. So, I said. He does not know it, said Flaminius, nor will he learn for perhaps a year. Learn what? I asked. Flaminius laughed and poured himself another drink. That he is dying of darkosis, he said. I wandered around the house. It was now past the 20th hour, the midnight of the Korean day. Yet still here and there I could hear the revels of Caduralia, which are often celebrated until dawn. My steps, as I was lost in thought, brought me back to the hall of Cernus in which we had sat table. Curious, I opened the door off the hall, through which the slave had taken the beast. I found a long set of stairs, and I followed them. I came to a landing, and there was a long corridor. At the end I saw 2 guards. They immediately sprang up, seeing me. Neither was drunk. Both were apparently perfectly sober, rested, and alert. Caduralia, I said to them. Both men drew their weapons. Do not pass this point, they said, killer. Oh, very well, I said. I looked at the heavy beamed door behind them. It was not locked on this side, which interested me. I would have thought it would have been bolted shut for fear of the beast locked within. There were, however, the means for shutting it at hand, 2 large beams which might be placed in iron brackets. Suddenly I heard an enraged roar from somewhere behind the door. I was wounded, I said to them, in the sport of hook-knife. I shoved back the sleeve of my tunic, revealing the bandage. Some blood had soaked through it. Leave! Cried one of the guards. I'll show you, I said, drawing down the white cloth, showing the wound. And suddenly there was a wild cry from behind the door of almost maniacal intensity, and I thought I heard something moving on the stones behind it, uncontrollable, clawed. Go! Cried the second guard. Go! But it is not a serious wound, I said, pinching it a bit, letting some more blood move from it, trickling down my forearm. To my horror, I heard something behind the door fumbling with a bolt. It seemed to draw it open, and then widely to thrust it back, keeping the door locked. And then I heard the bolt rattling in its brackets, as though something had seized it, and trembling was trying to hold it in place. The door, I then realized, had been locked on the inside and could be opened from the inside. There was another wild, eerie cry, an uncanny, almost demented roaring noise, and the bolt on the other side was dashed free of the door, and the two guards, with a cry of fear, hurled the beams into the two brackets fastening the door, which was made to swing outward. The two guards leant against the door. Behind it I heard an enraged, frustrated roaring, weird and terrible. I heard clawing at the wood. I saw the heavy door, as if struck with great force, buckle out against the beams. "Go!" screamed the first guard. "Go!" "Oh, very well," I said, and turned and walked away down the corridor. I could hear the guards cursing, and hear the door being thrust against the heavy beams. And then, when I was far down the corridor, I fixed the bandage again in place, shoved down my sleeve, and looked back. The thing behind the door was no longer making noise, and the door was no longer pressing against the beams. From where I stood I could hear the bolt inside being thrust back in place, locking it from the inside. And then, after a minute or two, I saw the guards remove the beams. What was inside was then apparently quiet. I continued to wander around the house, here and there bumping into inebriated guards or staff members, who invariably hailed me with Caduralia, to which greeting would respond in turn. A given thought kept going through my mind, for no reason that I was clearly aware of. It seemed unrelated to anything. It was Kerner saying to me outside the cell for special captures, "You, killer, would not make a player." His remarks kept burning its way through my brain. But as I walked the halls, it seemed to me that, on the whole, things were not proceeding badly, though I regretted the amount of time lost, apparently unnecessarily, in the house of Kernus. Elizabeth and Virginia and Phyllis, by tomorrow at this time, would be free, and Capris, now that Kernus was often in the central cylinder, attending the numerous duties of Obar of the city, had more time for his work. By Savar he hoped to be finished. Capris, I said to myself, a good man, Capris, thought well of by the priest-kings, trusted. He himself had arranged for an agent of priest-kings to purchase the girls. Capris, who seldom left the house. Brave Capris. You, killer, would not make a player. Brave Capris. I turned suddenly into the kitchen, in which the food for the hall of Kernus is prepared. Some startled slaves leapt up, each chained by one ankle to her ring, but most slept, drunk. One or two, too drunk to notice me, were sitting against the wall, their left ankles chained to their slave rings, a bottle of Kalinar in their grasp, their hair falling forward. "Where is Paga?" I demanded of one of the girls. Startled, I saw now that she stood forth from the shadows, and she had no nose. "Oh, there, master," she said, pointing to a basket of bottles under the large cutting table in the centre of the room. I went to the basket and took out a bottle, a large one. I looked around. There was the odour of food in the kitchen and of spilt drink. There were several yards of sausages hung on hooks, canisters of flours, sugars and salts, many smaller containers of spices and condiments, 2 large wine jugs in one corner of the room. There were many closed pantries lining the walls, and a number of pumps and tubs on either side. Some boxes and baskets of hard fruit were stored there. I could see the bread ovens in one wall, the long fire pit over which could be put cooking racks, the mountings for spits and kettle hooks. The fire pit was mostly black now, but here and there I could see a few broken sticks of glowing charcoal. Aside from this, the light in the room came from one small Thalarian oil lamp hanging from the ceiling, near the side where the kitchen slaves were chained, presumably to facilitate the guard check which, during the night, took place each second on. The other lamps in the room were now extinguished. I took another bottle of Parga from the basket and tossed it to the girl without a nose, who had directed me to the Parga. "Oh, thank you, master," she said, smiling, going back to her ring. I saw her nudge the girls on left and right of her. "Parga," I heard her whispered. "Casuaralia," I said to her. "Casuaralia," she said. Again the thought went through me, you killer would never make a player. You killer would never make a player. Grimly, the Parga bottle in my hand, I went back into the corridor and found the stairs that took one to lower floors in the cylinder and eventually to its depths. Lower and lower I went into the cylinder, the thought pounding in my brain, you killer would never make a player. I was beginning to feel sick with fear and with anger. A realization that horrified me seemed to claw at the back of my brain. As the beast had torn at the door unseen in the corridor above. You killer would never make a player. And now, Parga bottle in hand, I was passing guards, and I found myself walking down the narrow iron runways over the pens below, now filled with drunken slaves. Some were sleeping, some sitting stupefied in the centre of their pen, some singing brokenly to themselves, some trying to crawl again to the trough to lap up at the Parga mixed with their water. I saw one girl, drunk, put her hands through the bars which separated the cage which she shared with other female slaves from the cage adjacent to it, filled with male slaves. "Touch me," she begged. "Touch me." But the males lay in drunken sleep on the stones. I passed through the level on which interrogations take place, the level of the kennels, and went lower in the cylinder, now far below ground, past even more iron pens and levels. When I would pass a guard, I would hail him with Casuaralia and pass by. Always the thought burned through me, you would never make a player, and always I seemed driven by the black fear that would not speak itself, but whose presence I could clearly sense. Descending a last spiral of iron stairs, I came to the lowest level of the cylinder. "Who goes there?" cried a startled guard. "It is I, Curus of the Black Caste," I said, "on the orders of Cairnes, bringing Parga to prisoners on Casuaralia." "But there's only one prisoner here," he said, puzzled. "Well, the more for both of us, then," I said. He grinned and put out his hand, and I bit the cork from the bottle, which was a very large bottle, and handed it to him. "I have spent Casuaralia," he grumbled between guzzles, "sitting here without Parga. They didn't even send a girl down to me." I gathered from what he said that the guard was intended to remain sober, and from this that he had valuable materials under his care, and gathered also that the guard, from his disgruntlement, was ignorant of their value. It could, of course, be that he had merely been forgotten, overlooked in the general revels of Casuaralia. And then the guard sat down heavily, not willing to try to remain upright longer. "It's good Parga," he said. He took 2 or 3 more swallows, and then simply held the bottle looking at it. I left him and looked around. There were several corridors lined with small cells with iron doors, each with an observation panel. The corridors were damp. Here and there some water had gathered in recesses in the flooring. They were dark, save that each, at intervals of some 30 yards, was lit with a small Thalarian oil lamp. I picked up a torch and lit it in the light of a lamp near the swirling iron stairs. I heard the guard take another swallow of the Parga, a long swallow, and then he sat there again holding the bottle. I walked down a corridor or 2. The cells were locked, but by sliding back the panel and holding the torch behind me, I could see dimly into the cells. Each seemed piled with boxes. I recognized the boxes as being of the general sort which I had seen unloaded from the slavish ship in the Voltae. I gathered that most, or a great many, of the cells on this level might be filled with such merchandise, whatever it might be. Each of the cells was locked. I heard the guard calling out from near the stairs, "The prisoner is in 9 corridor." I strode back to him, stepping aside not to brush against a wet, silken, blazed-eyed Urt scampering along the edge of the corridor. "My thanks," I said to the guard. I put my hand on the bottle, but he retained it long enough to take yet another swallow, and then 2 more, and then he reluctantly surrendered it. "I'll bring it back," I assured him. "There's too much parga there for 1 prisoner," mumbled the guard rather groggily. "True," I said. I will return the bottle to you." I saw him close his eyes and slump a bit against the wall. "The 40 cell," he said. "Where's the key?" I asked. The other cells had all been locked. "Near the door," he said. "The other keys were not near the doors?" "The other keys," he mumbled, "are kept somewhere above. I do not know where." "My thanks," I said. I began to move down the 9 corridor, and soon in the flickering light of the torch I could read the 40 on a tiny metal plate over one of the cells. I slid back the observation panel. It, like the others, was about 6 inches in width and about 1 inch in height. A man could do little more than thrust his fingers through. Inside, very dimly, I could see a slumped dark figure lying near the back wall, chained. The key box was about 1 yard to the left of the keyhole and about 4 feet from the observation panel. It's a small, heavy metal box bolted to the stone of the wall. It opens and shuts to the left by means of a rounded knobbed screw, which must be turned several times before the small metal door opens. I rotated the screw and opened the box and removed the key. I inserted the key into the keyhole and swung back the door, lifting the torch as I entered. Startled by the light, an Urt scurried from my path, disappearing through a small crevice in the wall. It had been nibbling at the scrapings of dried gruel caked in a tin pan near the prisoner's foot. I could smell wet straw in the place, and the excrement of Urts and a human being. The slumped figure, that of a small man, naked, white-haired, stinking, skeletal, haggard, covered with sores, awakening, cried out in misery, whimpering. He crawled to his feet, squinting against the torch, trying to shelter his eyes with manacled, claw-like hands from the sudden fierce, painful blaze of the fire that his world must have then been for him. "Who are you?" he whispered. I saw that he was not actually an old man, though his hair was white. One ear had been partly bitten away. The white hair was long and white and yellowish. "My name is Curus," I said, speaking to him from the light of the torch. Each of his limbs and his throat were separately confined, each chained individually to the wall, each chain running separately to a ring bolted in the stone. Any one of the chains would have been sufficient to hold a man. I gathered that this prisoner must be unusual indeed. I observed further that the chains gave him some run, though not much, just enough to permit him to feed himself, to scratch his body, to defend himself to some extent against the attacks of the Urts. I gathered it was intended that this prisoner should, at least for a time, survive. Indeed, it seemed probable he had lived under these miserable conditions for a long time. I rose and found a torch rack in the room and set a torch in the rack. As I did so, I saw 4 or 5 Urts run for various small crevices in the stone. I returned to the prisoner. "You are of the black caste," he whispered. "At last they are done with me." "Perhaps not," I said. "Am I to be tortured again?" he asked piteously. "I don't know," I said. "Kill me," he whispered. "No," I said. He moaned. I looked on that small trembling skeletal body, the straggling hair, the sores, the mutilated ear. Angrier, I rose to my feet and searched around, finding some loose stone with which, with my foot, I wedged into the several crevices through which the Urts had darted. Unbelievingly, the prisoner, with his sunken eyes, now accustoming themselves to the light of the torch, regarded me. I returned to him. Beneath the iron on his ankles and wrists and on his throat there were scars like white bands, pale shadows of the dark metal. It would take months to form such scars, superseding the fearful sores that must first have been inflicted. "Why have you come?" he asked. "It's Caduralia," I said to him simply, and I held the bottle to him. "Caduralia?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and he began to laugh softly, hoarsely. "I was right. I was right." "I do not understand," I said. He began to suck at the bottle. There were few teeth left in his mouth. Most had rotted and apparently snapped away, or had been broken off by him and discarded. I forcibly drew the bottle from his mouth. I had no wish that he kill himself on the Paga. I didn't know what its shock would be to his system after apparently months of torture, confinement, fear, poor food, the water, and the Urts. "I was right," he said, nodding his head. "About what?" I said. "That today was Caduralia." He then indicated behind himself on the wall a large number of tiny, regularly formed scratches on the stone, perhaps cut there by a pebble or the edge of a tin drinking dish. He indicated the last of the scratches. "That is Caduralia," he said. "Oh," I said, regarding his crude calendar. There were a very large number of scratches. "Like any other day," he laughed. I let him have another small swig at the Paga bottle. "Some days," he said, "I was not sure that I marked the wall, and then I would forget, and sometimes I feared I had marked it twice." "You were accurate," I said, regarding the carefully drawn scratches, the rows methodically laid out, the months, the 5-day weeks, the passage hands. I counted back the rows, and then I said, pointing to the first scratch, "This is the first day of Enkara before the last Enkara." The toothless mouth twisted into a grin, the sunken eyes wrinkled with pleasure. "Yes," he said, "the first day of Enkara, 10,118, more than a year ago." "It was before I came to the house of Kernus," I said, my voice trembling. I gave him another drink of Paga. "Your calendar is well kept," I said, "worthy of a scribe." "I am a scribe," said the man. He reached under himself to hold forth for my inspection a shred of damp, rotted blue cloth, the remains of what had once been his robes. "I know," I said. "My name is Capris," he said. "I know," I said. I heard a laugh behind me and spun. Standing in the doorway, 4 guards aimed with crossbows with him, stood Kernus of the house of Kernus. With him also was the guard to whom I had given the Paga. In the background I could see the lean scribe whom I had thought for these many months to be Capris, and he was grinning. The men stepped within the room. "Do not draw your weapon," said Kernus. I smiled. It would have been foolish to do so. The 4 men with crossbows levelled their weapons at me. At this distance the bolts would pass through my body, shattering against the stones behind me. The guard to whom I had first given Paga came over to Capris and tore the bottle from his hand. And then, with the sleeve of his tunic, the guard distastefully wiped the rim of the bottle. "You were to have returned this Paga to me," said the guard, "were you not?" "It's yours," I said. "You have earned it." The man laughed and drank. "You killer," said Cairns, mocking, "would never make a player." "Apparently it is true," I said. "Chain him," said Cairns. One of the guards, putting his crossbow in the hall, brought forth heavy steel manacles. My hands were thrown behind my back. I felt the heavy steel close on my wrists. "May I introduce you to Capris?" said Cairns, looking down at the piteous chained figure by the wall. "Tal Cabot of Courrebas." I stood stunned. "Tal Cabot," I said numbly, "was slain in Courrebas." "Oh no," said Cairns. "The warrior Sandras of Thentis was slain in Courrebas." I looked at him. "Sandras thought he would be your assassin," said Cairns. "It was for that purpose he thought himself sent to Courrebas. Actually, he was sent there to die himself by the knife of a killer. His resemblance to a certain Courreban warrior, perhaps Tal Cabot, would make it seem clear in the darkness of the night that the knife had been intended for that warrior, and a convenient clue, a patch of green, would lead to R, and doubtless then to the house of Cairns." I couldn't speak. "Sandras was a fool," said Cairns. "He was sent to Courrebas only to be slain, that you would be lured to this house, where in effect you have been my prisoner for more than a year." "There must be some reason why you would want me here," I said. "Let us not jest, Tal Cabot," said Cairns. "We knew that priest-kings would suspect our house, as we intended that they should. So simple a ruse and a profitable one as selling barbarian earth girls under the auspices of the house would guarantee their investigation. For this investigation they would need men. Surely they would wish, if possible, to choose a man such as Tal Cabot." "You play well," I said. Cairns smiled. "And to guarantee that it should be Tal Cabot, whom we know, and with whom we, so to speak, have an old score to settle, the matter of the egg of the priest-kings, we sent Sandras of Thentis to Courrebas, where he, poor fool, was to be slain in your stead, that you would be brought here." "You play brilliantly," I said. And Cairns laughed. "And so we arranged to have you arrive in our house, the trusted spy and agent of priest-kings, who would thus think they themselves moving secretly and intelligently against us. And here, while we have through the months advanced our cause, you have stood by, patiently and cooperatively, a dupe and a fool. I'll guarantee that priest-kings would not send another." Cairns threw back his head and laughed. "You speak of we and our cause," I said. Cairns looked on me unpleasantly. "Do not mock me," he said, "warrior." He looked at me and then he smiled. "I serve those who are not priest-kings." I nodded. "It is war, Tal Cabot," he said, "and there will be no quarter given." He smiled. "Not then, nor now." I nodded once more, accepting his words. I had fought, I had lost. "Will you kill me?" I asked. "I have an amusing fate in store for you," said Cairns, "which I have considered these many months." "What?" I asked. "But first," said Cairns, "we must not forget the little beauty." I stiffened. "Sura reports that she had trained superbly, and she is now capable of giving the most exquisite of pleasures to a master." I tensed in the manacles. "I understand she expects, with the other two barbarians, to be purchased by an agent of priest-kings, and carried to safety and freedom." I looked at him angrily. "I expect that she will put on an excellent performance." I wished that I might break the steel from my wrist and seize his throat. "It should be worth seeing," said Cairns, "and I will see to it that you have a chance to see it." I choked with rage. "What is the matter?" asked Cernus, concerned. "Do you not wish to see the little beauty herself presenting herself on the block?" "I expect she, with the others, will bring much gold to the house of Cernus." I will invest in our cause," he said. He laughed. "It will be time enough afterwards," he said, "for her to learn that she has been truly sold." "You slain!" I cried. I hurled myself at Cernus, but 2 men seized me, threw me back, and then held my arms. "You, Talcabot," said Cernus, "would never make a player." "Slain!" I cried. "Slain!" "Casualia," said Cernus, smiling, and turned and left the cell. I stared after him, my wrists fought the steel. 2 of the guards laughed. "Casualia," I said bitterly. "Casualia."